The warning that no one heeded. The Galactic Council chamber stood as a beacon of unity, a monument to the cooperation of over 200 interstellar civilizations. It was here, in this vast and ancient hall, that the fate of entire species was debated, where laws governing countless worlds were passed. Today, however, it was not unity that filled the chamber, but a creeping undercurrent of arrogance. Standing alone at the central podium was Ambassador Ethan Graves, a representative of Earth, a planet still considered a fledgling participant in galactic affairs. His presence should have commanded attention, yet the whispers among the gathered representatives betrayed their disbelief. His voice, though steady, carried an urgency that made the air feel heavier than usual. "Honorable members of the Galactic Council," Graves began, his gaze sweeping across the alien dignitaries, "I come before you today with a warning that could determine the survival of all our worlds. We have uncovered irrefutable evidence of an approaching cataclysm, one we cannot afford to ignore." A ripple of discontent spread through the chamber. The murmurs rose, some amused, others skeptical. Many of the older races viewed humanity as little more than an overeager child, prone to paranoia and exaggeration. Chancellor Vorkai, a towering being with glistening silver skin and an air of condescension, leaned forward from his high seat. His voice, smooth and measured, carried the weight of centuries of governance. "Ambassador Graves, Earth has been a part of this council for only a short time. You claim to have discovered something that all our advanced monitoring systems fail to detect. Forgive my skepticism, but what proof do you bring?" Graves had expected this. With a flick of his fingers, he activated the holographic display beside him. The chamber dimmed as eerie, dark images filled the air. Abandoned outposts at the galaxy's edge, strange energy signatures, ancient distress signals that had not been decoded in millennia. Then came the most damning piece of evidence, archival records from the last known encounter with the threat humanity now warned against. "We have studied the ancient records extensively," Graves continued. "These patterns match perfectly with historical data from the last recorded emergence of the Scourge. If our predictions are correct, they are already on the move, and in less than 2 years, they will reach the first of our inhabited systems." The Scourge, a name spoken only in whispers, passed down through the fragmented histories of civilizations, so old they had forgotten what true war looked like. To many in the chamber, the Scourge was nothing more than a myth, a cautionary tale used to instill fear in the younger generations. Councillor Xelvath, a rigid and long-necked being from the Salary Dominion, narrowed his slitted eyes. "Ambassador Graves, with all due respect, civilizations far older than yours have monitored this galaxy for eons. If the Scourge were returning, we would have known before you." Graves clenched his fists but maintained his composure. He had spent months preparing for this, and yet no amount of evidence seemed enough to shake the arrogance of those who had grown complacent in their dominance. "Sometimes," he countered, "fresh eyes see what others have trained themselves to overlook. Earth never forgot how to watch for danger, how to prepare for threats long before they arrive. We are survivors. That is why we saw the signs before anyone else." Laughter erupted from some of the delegations. A member of the Taikari hierarchy, a species of avian-like creatures, let out a sharp cackle. "Survivors," he mocked. "Earth has barely had interstellar travel for a century. We have thrived for millennia. And yet you expect us to believe that your primitive world is better prepared than all of us combined." Graves didn't flinch. He had expected mockery, but he also knew that time would prove him right. "I am not asking you to believe out of faith," he said, his voice unwavering. "I am asking you to act, to prepare, to stand together before it is too late." Chancellor Vorkai exhaled slowly, the bioluminescent lines on his temple pulsing in thought. "And what exactly do you propose, Ambassador?" "That we divert resources to fight shadows. That we mobilize the Grand Fleet based on ghost stories." Graves met his gaze without hesitation. "I propose we strengthen our defenses, establish early warning systems, evacuate vulnerable outer colonies, Prepare for war so that we do not fight it at a disadvantage." The chamber filled with outright laughter now, a roaring wave of condescension that echoed off the high ceiling. The Chancellor's tone was final. "Earth's enthusiasm for security is noted, but we will not take such drastic actions on your word alone. Your motion is denied." Graves felt his stomach tighten, but he didn't let his disappointment show. Instead, he nodded curtly. "Then Earth will prepare alone." A hush fell over the chamber. Even those who had laughed moments ago now shifted in their seats. The Chancellor's gaze darkened. "You will do no such thing." Graves remained firm. "With all due respect, Chancellor, Earth's first duty is to its people. If the Council will not act, then we have no choice." The Chancellor's voice grew sharp. "Any unauthorized military buildup will be a direct violation of Council law. Earth's membership is still provisional. I strongly advise you not to test our patience." Graves didn't back down. "You'll thank us later." He turned on his heel and walked out of the chamber. Back in his quarters, Graves sent an encrypted message to Earth Command. "Council denied. Proceeding with Protocol Dark Winter." The response came instantly. "Understood. Military preparations continue. Public works projects will hide the buildup." Graves exhaled, staring out the massive window at the capital city of the Galactic Council. Towers of glass and metal stretched into the sky, filled with beings who believed they were untouchable. They didn't know what real survival looked like. Earth did, and when the time came, humanity would be ready. Somewhere in the void, beyond the reaches of civilized space, something ancient stirred. Something hungry. The countdown to war had begun. The first signs of war. The Galactic Council had made its decision. They had laughed, dismissed the warnings, and carried on as if nothing had changed. But in the darkness of space, beyond the reach of their bureaucratic debates and empty assurances, the universe was shifting. Back on Earth, deep beneath the surface in the hidden command center known only as Fort Horizon, the preparations continued. Admiral Julian Kane, commander of the United Terran Defense Fleet, stood before an expansive holographic projection of the galaxy. Dozens of red markers pulsed ominously at the fringes of known space, each one representing a lost colony, a vanished trade convoy, an outpost that had gone silent without explanation. The scourge was real, and it was coming. Kane's sharp, battle-worn eyes scanned the incoming reports. Ship disappearances were increasing. Unexplained power surges near deep space beacons, strange energy readings matching nothing in known records. Humanity had spent the last 2 years preparing in secret, but was it enough? The door behind him slid open, and Ambassador Ethan Graves stepped inside. His face was weary, lined with the frustration of dealing with the Council's stubbornness, but his resolve remained intact. "Admiral," Graves greeted, standing beside him to observe the flickering galactic display. "How much time do we have?" Kane exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "Not enough." He motioned toward a flashing marker. "We just lost contact with Outpost Echo 17. No distress signal, no emergency beacon, just silence." Graves' stomach turned. "That was one of our forward listening stations. That means they're close." Kane nodded grimly. "Too close. And the Council still refuses to act." The ambassador clenched his fists. "They think their ancient fleets will protect them, that their long history means they can't be caught off guard." He turned to Kane. "They don't understand what we're dealing with." Kane gestured toward the center of the holographic display, where a new projection appeared. An image reconstructed from the scattered remains of destroyed vessels along the outer rim. It was an enemy ship. It was unlike anything seen before. A sleek, obsidian black hull, no visible weapon ports, no heat signatures. Its surface seemed to shift, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, as if it were more shadow than solid matter. The Scourge weren't just another alien empire with superior technology. They were something else entirely. Kane's expression was cold. "This is what we're up against. Graves stared at the image. The Scourge was not a race. It was a force, a presence, a predator that adapted to every weapon used against it. Humanity's preparations had been extensive, but would they be enough? Then we need to move to Phase 2, Graves finally said. Kane raised a brow. Phase 2? You mean? Graves nodded. We need to start evacuating the outer colonies. Quietly. We can't tip off the council. Kane sighed, his hands tightening behind his back. We'll have to do it in waves. We can't move millions of people overnight. A sharp alarm suddenly blared through the command center. A holographic window expanded before them, displaying an incoming emergency transmission. The screen flickered to life, showing a man in a tattered uniform, his face drenched in sweat, his eyes wide with terror. This is Lieutenant Dorian Vale of the Artemis Colony Defense Force. The man shouted, his voice crackling over the speakers. We are under attack. Repeat. We are under attack. The Scourge air. Static. Then, silence. The transmission cut out. For a moment, neither Kane nor Graves spoke. Then Kane turned to his officers. His voice was like steel. Get me everything on Artemis Colony. Now. A junior officer scrambled to comply, typing furiously into the console. The data appeared instantly. Artemis Colony, one of Earth's most distant settlements, located in a strategic yet isolated sector near the galactic border. A research world, lightly defended. Kane's jaw clenched. Damn it, that colony wasn't just a settlement. It housed Project Aegis. Graves' eyes widened. That's where we were developing the new adaptive shielding tech. The Scourge had chosen their target well. The officer at the console turned, her face pale. Sir, we're detecting multiple ships exiting faster than light travel near Artemis Colony. Kane leaned forward, staring at the tactical display as red dots flooded the area. More than 300 enemy vessels. Graves exhaled. It's a slaughter. Kane wasn't willing to accept that. How many of our forces are there? The officer hesitated. Only the Artemis Defense Fleet. 50 ships, sir. 50 against 300. A slow dread settled over the room. They won't last an hour. Kane turned to the communications officer. Send a fleet now. Full burn. We don't have time for subtlety. The officer hesitated. Sir, if we deploy a fleet without council approval, we risk. Damn the council. Kane's voice was firm. They made their decision. Now we make ours. The order was sent. Within minutes, the largest coordinated fleet Earth had ever deployed in secret launched from hidden shipyards. 50 Terran warships, racing at breakneck speed toward Artemis Colony. But it wasn't just humanity that had taken notice. As Kane watched the fleet depart, another alarm sounded. This one different. More ships had just dropped out of hyperspace near Artemis Colony. But they weren't human. Kane stared at the screen in shock as a new set of warships appeared. Ones that didn't belong to Earth, but also weren't Scourge vessels. Graves recognized them instantly. Centurion warships. The Centurions, a militaristic empire that had remained neutral in all conflicts for over 2 centuries. No one knew what their endgame was, but they had always been known to act in their own best interests. Yet here they were, positioning themselves between the Scourge and Artemis Colony. Kane narrowed his eyes. What the hell are they doing there? The answer came seconds later, as a direct transmission from the Centurion flagship was received. A Centurion commander appeared on screen, his expression as sharp as his armor. Admiral Kane. The Centurion Empire recognizes the truth of your warnings. The Scourge is real, and we will not stand by it while another world is burned. Graves and Kane exchanged a glance. The Council had abandoned them, but humanity was no longer fighting alone. Kane turned back to his officers. Tell our fleet to form up with the Centurion warships. Today, we stand together. As the Scourge vessels drew closer, the first real battle of the war for survival was about to begin. And this time, humanity wasn't facing it alone. The battle for Artemis Colony. The moment the Centurion fleet declared its allegiance, everything changed. Humanity had spent the last 2 years preparing for war in the shadows, expecting to fight alone. Now, for the first time in history, another empire had openly defied the Galactic Council's decree of non-interference. Admiral Julian Kane watched from Fort Horizon's command center as tactical displays filled the air, showing the incoming chaos at Artemis Colony. The Scourge fleet was a wall of shifting darkness, a force unlike anything the galaxy had faced in over 10,000 years. 300 enemy ships. The Artemis Defense Fleet, 50 Terran ships, was woefully outnumbered. But now, with the Centurions at their side, they had a chance. Kane took a breath and turned to his fleet officers. Open a direct channel to Artemis Colony. A second later, Captain Rhea Donovan of the Artemis flagship, UTS Valkyrie, appeared on the holographic screen, her face bloodied, alarms blaring in the background. Admiral, we're already engaged. We're losing ships fast. A sudden explosion shook her vessel, sparks flying behind her. We can't hold much longer. Kane's voice was firm. Reinforcements are inbound. Hold the line. Donovan wiped blood from her forehead, gritted her teeth, and nodded. Understood. The transmission cut out, but Kane didn't hesitate. He turned to his fleet command. All Terran warships, push to maximum speed. Engage at will. The fleet had already been en route, but now they pushed their engines to the brink, racing toward Artemis Colony faster than physics allowed. The first engagement. Above Artemis, space was pure chaos. The Scourge warships moved like nothing recorded before. They didn't follow traditional battle formations. Their vessels were black voids, shifting and bending light, almost organic in the way they weaved between incoming fire. The Artemis fleet was struggling. Laser barrages, railgun rounds, even nuclear-tipped torpedoes, none of it was working. The enemy ships adapted with terrifying speed. The first wave of missiles hit, and they worked, but only once. The next volley. The Scourge ships had already evolved countermeasures. The Artemis fleet had lost 10 ships in minutes, but the Centurions had seen enough. The Centurion flagship Tyrannus charged into the fray, unleashing kinetic lances, weapons of pure gravitational force that tore through even the toughest warships. For the first time, Scourge vessels exploded. The sight of their ships actually being destroyed caused a shift. The Scourge hesitated. Captain Donovan saw the opening. All ships, focus fire on damaged targets. Target the ones that have already been hit. For a moment, the battle turned. Terran and Centurion warships concentrated their fire on the injured enemies, destroying nearly a dozen Scourge vessels in coordinated barrages. The Black Void creatures were finally bleeding. Then the Scourge changed tactics. Instead of dodging, their ships plowed directly into the defending forces like living missiles. Scourge boarding pods detached from the hulls and latched onto Terran and Centurion warships. And that's when the real nightmare began. The horror of Scourge boarding tactics. Inside the UTS Valkyrie, alarms screamed as the hull was breached. Terran Marines rushed to defensive positions, weapons at the ready. Then the first Scourge creatures emerged. They weren't mechanical, nor were they organic in any way that made sense. Shifting shadows wrapped around biomechanical exoskeletons, multi-limbed creatures with serrated appendages, no visible eyes, but razor-sharp instincts. Lieutenant Marcus Hale stood at the front of his squad, pulse rifle aimed at the breach. "Hold the line," he barked. The Scourge charged. The first wave of pulse rifle fire cut through the creatures, but they adapted. Within seconds, their exoskeletons hardened, absorbing the energy rounds. "Switch to ballistics," Hale yelled, and his Marines unloaded kinetic rounds. The Scourge screeched, some falling, others charging through. Hand-to-hand combat broke out. The Scourge were faster, stronger, and unrelenting. They tore through armor, ripping soldiers apart with terrifying efficiency. But humans had something else. Survival instinct. Adaptability. and sheer, unrelenting fury. Hale grabbed a high-explosive grenade, pulling the pin with his teeth. "Get off my goddamn ship," he roared, shoving the grenade into a Scourge warrior's chest before kicking it back into the breach. The explosion ripped through the boarding pod, blasting Scourge warriors into the void. The Terran Marines rallied. They fought like demons. And against all odds, they held the line. The turning point. The battle raged for hours. The Centurion fleet took massive casualties, their once impenetrable ships now cracking under the Scourge's relentless adaptations. But something changed. Admiral Kane, watching from Fort Horizon, noticed it first. "Look at the battlefield data," he muttered. "They aren't just adapting anymore. They're slowing down." The Scourge had been undefeated for eons, but they had never fought a species like humanity before. A species that never fought the same way twice. Humanity wasn't just adapting to them. Humanity was forcing them to adapt faster than they could handle. "Captain Donovan," Kane ordered, "launch the contingency." On the Valkyrie, Donovan didn't hesitate. "Project Revenant is a go. Deploy the new torpedoes." From the hulls of Terran warships, a new kind of missile was launched. The warheads weren't traditional. They were hybrid adaptive weapons. Each torpedo rewrote itself in real time, shifting frequencies, altering payloads, recalibrating at the last millisecond. The first wave of Scourge ships countered them. But the second wave, the Scourge had no answer. Explosions rippled through their fleet, ripping apart their formations. The black tide began to collapse. Scourge ships turned and fled. The battle was over. The first victory against the greatest enemy the galaxy had ever known. The aftermath. The cost had been devastating. Of the 50 Terran ships that arrived, only 20 remained. The Centurions had lost half their fleet. Artemis Colony had suffered severe damage. But they had won. For the first time in history, the Scourge had been driven back. Back on Earth, Kane and Graves stood in silence. "They'll be back," Graves muttered. "And next time, they'll be even stronger." Kane nodded. "Then we'll be stronger too." Across the galaxy, the news spread. Humanity had done the impossible. And the Galactic Council. They had ignored the warning. Now, they would watch in horror as the war they refused to fight began to consume the stars.